The bell above the pharmacy door rang, and the temperature of the room dropped 10 degrees. Two men walked in first, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark suits too clean for men who looked like they knew exactly how to hurt people. Their eyes swept the small pharmacy like they were checking for threats, not medicine. Behind the counter, Mirabelle Davies's fingers stilled over the register. Something in her gut, the same instinct that had saved lives on this very counter, told her to be very, very careful. Then he walked in. He moved like a man who had never once had to hurry for anyone. Tall, sharp-featured, dressed in a black coat that screamed of luxury, his right arm resting in a simple sling. Even wounded, and in a run-down pharmacy at 11 at night, Choi Ji-won carried himself like the room already belonged to him. His eyes found her immediately, cold, assessing and unbothered. One of the guards stepped forward and placed a folded prescription on the counter with 2 fingers, sliding it toward her, like he was doing her a favor by not making her walk over herself. "Fill it," he said. Quickly. Mirabelle had been on her feet for 10 straight hours by then, her back aching, her eyes raw from squinting at fine print under fluorescent light. She had smiled at customers, who barely looked at her twice, caught a dangerous dosage error that morning that her manager had quietly taken credit for, and swallowed the insult the way she swallowed most things here, without complaint. But none of that mattered now. Every nerve in her body sharpened to a single point as she unfolded the paper in front of her. Her trained eyes moved fast over the doctor's handwriting. Dr. Han Suk-jin. She recognized the name, one of the private physicians who served Busan's wealthiest families. The prescription itself looked ordinary. A common blood thinner, the kind she filled a dozen times a week. But then her eyes caught something else. Clipped to the back of the paper was an old allergy report, likely pulled for insurance purposes. And there it was, buried in small clinical print. Severe allergic reaction, anticoagulant compounds, cardiac risk. Her stomach dropped. She looked up slowly, from the paper to the guard, and then, unable to stop herself, to the man standing quietly by the door. This was his prescription, his name, his body, and this medication, combined with what his own file said about him, would not heal him. It would kill him. Slowly, quietly, in a way that would look, to anyone watching, like a heart simply giving out one night. Her heart began to pound so loudly, she was sure the guards could hear it. Every instinct told her to simply hand it over, fill it, smile, let them leave, and forget she ever saw the file. That was the safe thing. That was the thing that kept ordinary people alive in the presence of dangerous men. But Mirabelle Davies had never been very good at choosing safety over what was right. "I can't fill this," she said. The words came out steadier than she felt. The guard blinked, as if she had spoken in a language he didn't understand. "Excuse me? I said I can't fill this prescription." She set it down gently on the counter, her hands trembling just slightly, though she kept her voice level. "Whoever this is for is allergic to this compound. Taking it could cause a serious, even fatal, reaction to the heart." The air in the pharmacy went tense suddenly, like a wire pulled to its breaking point. The second guard's hand drifted, almost lazily, toward the inside of his jacket. "You don't get to decide that. Fill the prescription." "I won't," Mirabelle said, and this time, her voice did not shake at all. "Not until I speak to whoever this medicine is for. Directly." It was, by any measure, a reckless thing to say to dangerously looking men in an empty pharmacy at night, but something in her refused to bend. She had sworn an oath long before she ever stood behind this counter, an oath that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the belief that a life, any life, deserved better than silence. That was when he finally spoke. "And if I told you," Choi Ji-won said, stepping forward with unhurried menace, "that the medicine is for me?" His voice was low, smooth as polished river stone, but with an undercurrent of something hard and cold beneath it, like ice hidden under still water. Up close, he was even more commanding, his gaze sharp enough to cut through steel, studying her the way a predator studies something unfamiliar in its territory. Mirabelle's pulse roared in her ears. But she lifted her chin. Then I would tell you, sir, that either your doctor made a terrible mistake or someone wants you dead, and they are counting on you never finding out how. For a long moment, nobody moved. The rain outside seemed to grow louder in the silence. Jiwon's guards looked at him, waiting for the order that would surely follow, the one that would make this defiant woman disappear from their lives. But Jiwon did not give it. He simply stared at Mirabelle, something unreadable flickering behind his dark eyes. He was not used to being told no. He was even less used to someone doing it out of concern for his life, rather than fear of his power. You would risk my reaction to this claim, he said quietly. Over a piece of paper? I would risk anything, Mirabelle answered. Over watching a man walk out of here, carrying his own death and calling it medicine. Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth, not yet, but respect, cold and reluctant, the way frost creeps slowly across glass. Fine, Jiwon said finally, waving off his guards with 2 fingers. I will not take it tonight. But understand something, Miss Mirabelle, she said. Mirabelle Davies. Miss Davies. He said her name like he was testing its weight. If you are wrong about this, it will cost you far more than your job, and if you are right, his eyes darkened. Then the people who wrote this prescription will not sit quietly while you interfere with their plans. In my world, silence is never accidental, and neither are mistakes like this one. If someone comes for you because of this, that will be my proof. It was not comfort, it was not even kindness. It was the cold logic of a man who had survived his world by testing loyalty through fire. He turned and walked out into the rain without another word, his guards following like shadows. Mirabelle stood frozen behind the counter long after the bell above the door stopped ringing, her heart still hammering, her hands finally beginning to shake now that the danger had passed. In the sudden quiet, everything she had pushed aside in the heat of the moment came rushing back at once. Her feet ached from 10 straight hours on shift. Her eyes burned from squinting at fine print under fluorescent light since early morning. She thought, briefly and bitterly, of the dosage error she had caught that very morning on an elderly man's prescription, quietly fixed, credit for it taken by her manager in front of the district supervisor, without so much as a glance her way. That was simply how it worked here. Mirabelle did the work. Someone else took the bow. The fragile life she had built for herself in this city, far from home, with no family nearby to catch her if she fell. She had just stood her ground against armed men for a stranger's life, knowing full well it could cost her everything she had left to lose. She did not regret it, not for 1 second, but she was still afraid, in the small, human way that bravery never quite erases. She did not know it yet, but she had just stepped into the center of a war she had no part in starting. 2 days later, in a penthouse office overlooking the glittering skyline of Busan, Dr. Han Suk-jin paced anxiously in front of a woman who sat with the stillness of someone completely in control. Yoon Mi-rae was beautiful, in the practiced, sculpted way of someone who had spent a lifetime being looked at. She wore her engagement ring, a stone the size of a small coin, like a burden rather than a gift. Her eyes were fixed on the city below, distant and cold. She refused to fill it, Han said, wringing his hands. The pharmacist. She saw the allergy report and refused. Ji-suwon is asking questions now. Then answer them, Mi-rae said flatly. She could ruin everything. Mi-rae finally turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. Then ruin her first. Because the truth, hidden beneath silk dresses and diamond rings, was far uglier than anyone in Ji-won's world suspected. Mi-rae had never loved Ji-won. She had loved his half-brother, Choi Ji-ho, for years, since long before either brother had inherited anything at all. But when their father died and left the empire to Ji-won, instead of Ji-ho, Mi-rae had made a cold, calculated choice. She married ambition instead of love. Now she wanted both. She wanted the freedom of Ji-won's death and the comfort of returning to Ji-ho once the empire was in mourning and vulnerable to a new marriage. Dr. Han, drowning in gambling debts that Mireille had generously agreed to pay off, had simply been her tool. Slow poison, disguised as treatment. A death that would look natural. No one would ever suspect the grieving fiancé. Except now, a pharmacist with sharp eyes had noticed what she was never supposed to notice. "Handle it quietly," Mireille said, turning back to the window. "Get her fired. Get her license pulled. Make her regret ever reading that file." It did not take long. By the end of the week, Mr. Owusu called Mirabelle into his office with the tight, apologetic smile of a man who had already decided to sacrifice her before she even sat down. "There have been complaints," he said, not meeting her eyes, "about your conduct, refusing to serve a client, causing a scene. The corporate office is threatening to pull our pharmacy license entirely unless we take action. I refuse to fill a prescription that would have killed someone," Mirabelle said, disbelief rising hot in her chest. "I did my job." "I know what you believe you did," Owusu said, "but I have a business to protect, Mirabelle. I'm sorry. We have to let you go." She left the pharmacy that afternoon with a small box of her belongings, walking out past co-workers who suddenly found their shoes very interesting, unwilling to meet her gaze. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained the color of wet ash, matching exactly how she felt inside. She had done the right thing, the only thing her conscience would allow, and it had cost her everything. She sat on a bench outside the building for a long time, the small box balanced on her knees, watching strangers hurry past under umbrellas that were no longer needed. Somewhere deep inside her, beneath the humiliation and the fear of an empty bank account, a small stubborn voice refused to apologize for what she had done. She had not lied. She had not exaggerated. She had simply told the truth to a man who had every reason in the world to have her silenced instead of thanked for it. If this was the price of that truth, she told herself, then so be it. She would rather be unemployed and honest than comfortable and complicit in something she could not undo. Still, walking home that evening through streets slick with rain, she could not shake the hollow feeling settling in her chest, the quiet dread of not knowing how she would pay next month's rent, or whether any other pharmacy in the city would even consider hiring a woman who had just been publicly dismissed under a cloud of manufactured complaints. She did not know that, across the city, a phone call was already being made. Quick stop Afro-Korean Vibes community. Kindly like this video and subscribe to the channel. I would love to know where you are watching from. Kindly drop it in the comment. Now, let's continue the story. Choi Ji-won received the news of Mirabelle's dismissal the same evening, delivered by an assistant too nervous to soften the details. He sat in silence in his office for a long moment, his sharp eyes narrowing as the pieces began, slowly, to align. A pharmacist refuses a prescription that would have killed him. Within days, she is fired under manufactured complaints, her license threatened, her reputation attacked. Not because she made a mistake, because she had been right. He thought of his own words to her that rainy night. "If you are right, they will come for you." He had meant it as a test. He had not expected them to move so quickly, or so viciously, against someone with no power to defend herself. For the first time in longer than he could remember, something other than cold calculation stirred in his chest. Anger. Not the controlled, strategic anger he used as a weapon in boardrooms and back alleys, but something raw and immediate. Someone had tried to have him killed, and in trying to cover their tracks, they had gone after the one person brave enough to save his life. He picked up his phone and made a single call. By morning, Choi Ji-won owned the entire pharmaceutical chain that had fired her. The boardroom on the top floor was silent when Ji-won walked in, flanked by his lawyers and two of his most intimidating guards. Mr. Owusu sat pale and sweating at the long table, alongside several nervous board executives. Dr. Han Suk-jin had been summoned as well, believing he was there to discuss Ji-won's ongoing care. He had no idea what was waiting for him. "As of 6 o'clock this morning," Ji-won said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade through silk, "I am the sole owner of this company. Every branch, every contract, every decision." Murmurs rippled through the room. Owusu's hands trembled visibly against the polished table. I understand, Jiwon continued, that a pharmacist named Mirabelle Davies was recently dismissed from your Busan branch. I would like to know why. There were complaints, sir, Owusu stammered. Corporate pressure. We were told her license could be pulled, and we will also be affected if we don't act. Told by whom? Jiwon's gaze slid, slow and deliberate, to Dr. Han, who had gone the color of old paper. I don't know what you mean, Han said. Let me help your memory. Jiwon placed a folder on the table, sliding it toward him. Inside was the original prescription, the allergy report, and a timeline of the calls made to corporate in the days following Mirabelle's refusal. You wrote me a prescription that would have stopped my heart, slowly, quietly, and made it look natural. And when a pharmacist caught your mistake, you didn't correct it. You tried to bury her instead. The room had gone utterly still. Even the guards seemed to hold their breath. I don't know what you're talking about, Han whispered, though sweat now ran freely down his temple. You have two choices, Jiwon said, his voice dropping to something far more dangerous than shouting could ever be. You tell me everything. Right now, in front of these witnesses. Or I let my lawyers, and certain associates of mine who are far less patient than they are, handle this conversation privately. Choose carefully, Doctor. Han's resolve, thin and cowardly to begin with, shattered completely. It was Mi-Ray, he blurted, the words tumbling out in a panicked rush. Yoon Mi-Ray. She paid off my debts. She told me what to prescribe. She said the heart failure would look natural. She's in love with your brother, Ji-ho. She always has been. She only agreed to marry you for the company. She wanted you gone so she could go back to him with the family fortune already secured. The confession hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Jiwon's expression did not change, but something in his eyes went colder than anyone in that room had ever seen. Betrayal from an enemy was expected. Betrayal from the woman who wore his ring was something else entirely. Arrest him, he said quietly to the two officers who had been waiting outside the door the entire time. As Han was led away, still babbling apologies no one wanted to hear, Jiwon turned to Mr. Owusu, who looked like he might collapse where he sat. You knew this woman saved a life, Jiwon said, and instead of protecting her, you threw her away to protect yourself. Sir, You're finished, Jiwon said simply. Not just here, anywhere in this city. Within the hour, security forces acting on Jiwon's orders intercepted Yoon Mi-Ray at Gimhae International Airport, a single suitcase in hand, a ticket to Jeju Island clutched in her manicured fingers, running not from justice, but toward the illusion of a new life, with a man who, by then, had already learned exactly what kind of woman she truly was. She was taken into custody without a single struggle, her carefully constructed world collapsing as quietly as it had been built. Mirabelle was sitting in her small apartment that evening, staring at a stack of unpaid bills and wondering what she would do next, when there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Choi Ji-won standing in her narrow hallway, looking entirely out of place among the peeling paint and flickering light bulb, and yet somehow more human than he had seemed standing in his own boardroom. Mr. Choi, she said, too stunned to say much else. You saved my life, he said simply, and I let you lose everything for it. I came to fix that, he told her, standing right there in her doorway. Everything that had happened. The confession, the arrests, the truth about Mi-Ray and his brother. Mirabelle listened in stunned silence, feeling something between relief and disbelief wash over her. I don't know what to say, she admitted quietly. Say you'll accept a position as manager, Jiwon said. The largest branch in Busan, full authority, full respect. It's the very least owed to someone who chose honesty over her own safety. Mirabelle opened her mouth to protest that it was too much, but the look in his eyes told her arguing would be pointless. Days later, on her birthday, a courier arrived at her new office with a small, elegant envelope. Inside was not a gift card or a bouquet of flowers, but a deed, full ownership of the pharmacy itself, transferred entirely into her name. She stared at the paper, stunned. "This is too much," she whispered, when Ji-won arrived personally to see her reaction. "Nothing," he said quietly, "is too much for a life saved." Word spread quickly through the old pharmacy staff. The same co-workers who had once looked away as she was escorted out, now scrambled to offer polite smiles and eager greetings, suddenly remembering just how competent, how remarkable, Mirabelle had always been. She noticed the change, of course. She was not foolish enough to mistake it for real respect, but she was far too busy now, and far too focused on what lay ahead, to spend much time caring about people who had only valued her once she became valuable and powerful. Because sitting quietly beside her, in the reflection of the glass storefront that now bore her name, was the most powerful man in the city, watching her with something that had long ago stopped being simple gratitude. In the end, the truth had done what fear and money could not. It had exposed every liar, protected the innocent, and lifted up the one person who had never once compromised her integrity, even when silence would have been so much safer. The world often measures people by what they own, what they wear, or who bows to them. But real worth is proven in the quiet moments no one is watching, in the choice to do what is right, when doing what is easy would cost nothing at all. Mirabelle Davies had nothing but her honesty the night Choi Ji-won walked into her pharmacy. In the end, it turned out to be worth more than anything money could ever buy. Never underestimate the person the world overlooks. Sometimes, they are the very ones standing between you and disaster. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more amazing Afro-Korean drama stories, and we'll see you in the next one.